Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Hornsvoden. As always, before we start the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I say it every week, but it is the lifeline to the show. It's how we keep going week in, week out. So if you can head over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast, have a look on there. It starts from £3 a month. You get every episode we've ever done, the entire back catalogue. You get bonus Q&A episodes. You get the lovely Viking smut episodes of myself, Claire, and Mags do, where we look at amateur Viking erotica, and they're a light-hearted, fun episode. You get those on there, so have a look, and there'll be something that you like. If not, just a 5-star rating, positive review, wherever you get your podcast. It helps somebody new discover us and helps the podcast grow. With that said, let's jump into today's show. So I'm really excited to get into this topic. It's one we've never covered before, and one that I don't know that much about, but probably should. But first introductions go to Mags, our in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Hello, everyone. I'm also equally excited about today's episode because, as I mentioned at like the precipice of last episode, I've come across this topic quite a lot because I'm an avid reader of fantasy. But then when Dan pitched this episode and said this is what we're going to be talking about, I realized that I haven't actually looked into the original myth itself. So I'm very interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today's guest is Terry Gunnell. This is Terry's third appearance, and Terry is a professor emeritus in folkloristics at the University of Iceland. There is tons of books and accolades that we can put that I could read out, but we'd be here all day. So Terry is an author, editor, and has written numerous articles and chapters on old Nordic religion, folk legends and beliefs, festivals, folk drama and performance. And you've created quite a few different databases to collate all this information into. Amongst this world, you are somewhat of a legend, as much as that you might not like being told that, but I think that you're a very formidable name in this I
feel a bit like Casper the Friendly Ghost or something with this one. Yeah, okay.
You're always that name that kind of, I don't know, maybe you don't notice it, but for me on, I don't know, the outside and still in very much the like Facebook groupie world and the people who have just an interest in all this topic, you're always one of those names that pops up as like a good legitimate source to listen to, and somebody who's, been around I don't want to say been around a while, but you've put in the hard graft.
Cheers, many thanks. As I feel like sort of, I don't know, some dinosaur on the edge of extinction.
Oh no!
No, that wasn't intended.
Yeah, but anyway, nice to be with you again. It's a nice group.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. It seems to be around the Christmas time when my email goes out and be like, Terry, do you fancy coming and talking again? So we will have to do this away from Yuletide. But today's topic is the Wild Hunt. And this is, it's a story, or I don't know, I guess, is it a complete story or an image? Whatever it is, I've heard of and I've seen referenced, but I don't know too much about it. I've seen it linked to like Northern Europe, to like the Norse, but also I had a little look earlier on Wikipedia, just a little research. It seems that there's versions of it in Italy and Spain and Germany and the Slavic regions. It seems, much bigger than just Northern Europe.
Mm-hmm. No, it's something that's well, you'll hear in a minute as we go through this, and it's going to be a bit of a mixture of storytelling and discussion at the same time, and I'll show you some pictures at the same time as well. We're dealing with something here that is really a mixture of both stories, and I'm talking here about legends, and legends are always associated with places and people. as opposed to fairy tales, which are set in the world of fantasy. These are stories that are told by people in the evenings on farms all over Scandinavia in the past, and they were stories that were meant to be believed. They were part of a sort of storytelling school session to a certain extent. You were learning about morals, you were learning about how to deal with the outside world and how to deal with strangers, and all of these things as part of the storytelling sessions. So legends, as the Grimm brothers said initially, are not as much poetic as they are historical, and they're meant to be seen in this way. So the Wild Hunt stories will be coming on later on to the versions that are told within Scandinavia within the 19th century. But in very general terms, when we think about the Wild Hunt, we're thinking about Wagner and the Ride of the Valkyries, which everybody knows quite well, and the music that goes with it. I was thinking of getting Dan to sing it, but I decided not. And get Meg
what a missed.
Meg to act it out at the same time as he sings it. The sort of this element of it. What I'd like to do actually is to show how old these motifs are and where they come from initially within Scandinavia. And also that there is more than one type of story, but that they're closely connected and certainly very closely connected with traditions and customs that take place around Christmas time. So what I think I'm going to do here, first of all, if you let me do a little bit of storytelling for a while, and then we'll have a break for questions and then sort of go on.
So as Terry is prepping this, I would just take this opportunity to invite our listeners to catch this episode on YouTube so that you can see the wonderful things that Terry is sharing with us.
Absolutely.
So this is the sort of image that we have, the Ride of the Valkyries. But notice straight away here, we have a number of, unfortunately, bare-breasted ladies who are leading the group. I'm going to come back to the women later on. Thor is in the back, and here we have Odin on the side. Now, the earliest sort of stories that we have come out of the Icelandic sagas from about 1300. And the first story that I want to give you takes place on a farm called Fróðá, which is down in the south of Iceland. It's very near this place. And the events take place at around about Christmas time. And they've just been having a sort of Christmas party there. And then what basically happens is that a number of people just before Christmas have died of a strange illness, very dark outside. And these deaths have been accompanied by the violent death of a shepherd and the strange appearance of an aged, naked female ghost who started appearing in the cooking area of the farmhouse and cooking breakfast in the morning, as well as a number of other rather frightening omens. So it's dark and it's cold, and there's and it might be Christmas, but people are very nervous outside the farmhouse. So the next evening, the farmer at Fróðá, Thorodd, rode out from Ness with his men and some dried fish, and they were all drowned. And the boats and the fish were all washed ashore, but the bodies were never found. And when the sad news came to Fróðá, Thorodd's son Kjartan and his wife Þuríður invited their neighbours to come over for a funeral feast, at which they were going to make use of the ale that they'd been brewing for Christmas. So at the first evening of the feast, when all of the guests were seated there, suddenly the door was thrown open, and in came Thorodd and his companions, all of them dripping and drenched to the skin and very dead. Everyone did their level best to welcome them into the farmhouse, and while they weren't over happy about them visiting when they were supposed to be drowned, they thought this might be a good omen, because in those days it was believed that drowned people had been received by the sea goddess Rán if they came to their own funeral feast. And so Thorodd and his drowned kinsman came slowly into the main room, which had two doors, and then went on into the living room. And they ignored the greetings that the living people gave them and just sat down at the fire. And quite naturally, those who were in the living room at the time made a rapid exit. The Thorodd and his men, drowned men, nonetheless stayed on till the fire got very low, and then they went away and came back the next day and came back again. And as long as the funeral feast went on, the same thing continued. Every evening, the drowned guys would come to the fire. And as the saga says, this gave the people attending the feast plenty to talk about. But there was hope that the haunting would come to an end once the feast was over. But it didn't. After the feast, the human visitors went back home. There was a feeling that it was going to be a bit dull without the human people there. But they should have known better. That evening, after the guests had gone and the fire in the living room had been lit as usual, after as soon as it was ablaze, in came Thoroddr and his companions, all of them soaking wet, and they sat down at the fire and began squeezing the water out of their clothes. And as soon as they'd taken their seats, then the door opened again, and in came another group. Thorir Woodenleg, wonderful Viking name there. Thorir Woodenleg and his 6 companions, all of whom had recently died of disease and should have been in the churchyard. These figures also entered the room, every one of them covered in earth, and they started shaking the dirt out of their clothes and throwing mud at Thoroddr and his drowned companions. It was a sort of equivalent of a sort of supernatural Christmas food fight. Everyone else left the room as fast as they could go, and that evening they had to do without any light, any heating stones, and everything else that the fire had provided. The next evening they tried lighting a fire in another room, hoping the dead people would not come there, but things turned out differently. Everything happened as before, and both parties now came to sit by the new fire. And on the third evening, Kjartan made the suggestion they should light a different fire in the living room and then a second one in a separate room, and that actually worked. But certainly Thoroddr and the other dead men came and sat by the long fire, allowing those who were living a bit of peace to sit in the smaller room, and that's how it went on all the way through Christmas. And it wasn't until Candlemas that the dead visitors from outside were eventually exorcised by a Christian priest, and they made a departure back to the hills and the sea that they'd come from. And they went back to this mountain here, which is called Helgafell, or the Holy Mountain. And certainly the belief was that dead people in this area died into that mountain. Now, this idea of people visiting at Christmas time is echoed in another very early saga, in which the hero, Grettir, somewhat like a very ancient version of Bruce Willis in the Die Hard movies, always finds himself battling booglies of one kind or another every single Christmas. Christmas comes and then Bruce is called out or Grettir is called out. The most famous account tells of Grettir here wrestling with a ghost called Glaumur, who's annually been attacking a northern farm at Christmas time again. The story is very closely related to that in an Old English account telling of the hero Beowulf and his fights with a golem-like monster Grendel, and then even worse, Grendel's mum. And some of you might remember her from when she took the image of Angelina Jolie. Now keep her in mind because we're going to come back to these female figures later on. Now, one more set of stories here, one more story, well, 2 stories actually, from sagas before we come back to a quick chat, and then we can go on to other traditions. But corporeal ghosts weren't the only outside supernatural threat in medieval Iceland, because we know that at the beginning of winter, which is in the late October, a period that's now seen as being Halloween, that period was also closely associated with women. Now, in the Nordic countries, in earlier times, there used to be only 2 seasons. There was winter, and then there was summer, and which makes total sense if anybody's ever been to Iceland in what ought to be the autumn. It lasts about 1 day. But anyway, winter started in October, and the people on that night, well, just to say it, in the past, night came before day, and this is why we talk often about Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, Midsummer Night, and things of this kind. So in Scandinavia, Christmas begins at 6 on Christmas Eve, in the same way as night came before day in the past. It's the same thing you get in Ireland with Samhain, at least in the past. So this is the time when everything is sort of getting colder and darker. And the beginning of winter was a time when the sun went down, and it was also a time when women would come around and prophesy about how the year was going to be. And this is another saga called Eric's Saga, where we hear about this woman who tells people how the year is going to be. She's called Thorbjörg. And she comes around and prophesies up on a platform, and other women are dancing around outside. But women, essentially, not men. And then we have another saga, this other saga, called Theodrandi Tháttur or Thorhals, the story of Theodrandi and Thorhallur. So this is a short period. It's very stiff. It's really all about Christian missionaries, but has a lot of very old folklore in it. And basically, it takes place just before the conversion of Iceland in around about 1000, and tells about a pagan chieftain called Hallur of Síða, who later became one of the big champions of the Christian cause. And at that time, he was still pagan, and he was planning to hold a festival for the winter nights, the beginning of winter, which elsewhere is called the Night of the Disit, the Night of the Female Spirits. Now, again, they had the feast ready there, and there weren't many people coming because it was very stormy outside, typical Hollywood sound effects. And when people sat down that evening, a man called Thor Hatlet, who had a particular knowledge of pagan ways, said, I would like to ask people to take my advice. Nobody should go out tonight because there'll be great harm if you do this. Whatever happens, do not take any notice. Don't go outside, because if you do, something bad's going to happen. Now, the son of Hatlet was looking after everybody and washing their feet, I suppose as people do at this time, was very meek and humble, a little bit Jesus-like. And then when everybody was asleep, there came a loud knock on the door. And as ordered, everybody acted as if they knew nothing about it, but it happened 3 times. And Theodrandi leapt up and said, it's a bit of a pity that everyone here is pretending to be asleep when there are guests coming. And he took a sword in his hand and went out, and he could see no one. And it struck him that some guests might have ridden onto the farm and then gone back to get others. So he went outside to the wood pile, and then he suddenly heard the sound of riding coming onto the farm. And there were 9 women, all of them in black clothes with drawn swords. And he also heard the word of riding into the field coming from the south, another 9 women now in white clothes. And he was planning to go out and tell people what he'd seen, but the people dressed in black, the women who were dressed in black, got to him first and attacked him. He defended himself bravely, as a Viking hero will, and a long time later, the insiders went out to see where Theodrandi had got to. And it was midnight and moonlight and frost, and there he was, covered in blood outside. They carried him in, and he died the next morning. Now, the Christian account was that the armed ladies in black were pagan Disit, who wanted a human sacrifice, while those who were Christian were in white. Now, here we're coming to the idea, again, of outsiders attacking farms, taking sacrifices, led by a female spirit, and that leads us to one other account here, also in one of these early sagas. This also takes place inside a farm. Here's the women. And this is a saga which takes place a little bit later in the 13th century. And what's been happening is that there's a man who's been making fun of another man. He's a sort of satirist, a bit like Stephen Colbert in America, making fun of Trump. And the guy who's been made fun of is rather annoyed. So again, you can think of Trump in this role as well. And he comes charging down from the mountainside onto the farm where the satirist lived. And then he says, Here fer Grilla I gardovan o hevra sir hala femtan. Here comes Grilla onto the field with 15 tails on her. Now that verse is worth bearing in mind because it's still being used in the Faroe Islands, and also it was being used in Shetland later on in connection with figures who wear costumes and go around trick-and-treating at Christmas time. And the other interesting part of it, here's Grilla in later times as she looks in Iceland, and the way she was supposed to have been seen initially. Another image of her. And notice her 15 tails on the back. And these are the lads who follow her nowadays in Iceland, the Christmas lads, who I'll come back to, a group of people who follow a woman onto farms. Now, just to quickly run over these before I go back.
That would be me.
Right, all of these guys take things. So we've got sausage swiper, meat hook, candle beggar, bowl licker, a sort of early version of a dishwasher, curd slurper, and then there's the Yuletide cat as well, who accompanies this bunch. And we find the same sorts of traditions going on in the Faroe Islands as well. Later in the year at Shrovetide, again going up as Grilla. And this is again how she looks. And Ireland has very similar ideas of an old woman being associated with the winter. Now, what I can come back to this later on, and I'll stop sharing screen for a minute, and you can ask a few questions if you like. But the other key thing about the Grilla account is that the man who's been making fun of her is called Steingrimur Skin Grillusson, not named after a man, which is the usual pattern, but named after Skin Grilla, which does suggest that he too wore costumes when he was making fun of other people, and that we have a connection to masked traditions, which I'll tell you much more about later on as we go on to later traditions. So the wild ride, yes, it's mentioned in one of the poems where a dead person says, "I need to go up and join the ride" later on. But this idea has very, very early roots of outsiders coming onto a farm and led by women and then taking over. Any questions about that before we go on? I knew if there's silence, I can just go on anyway.
No. Max,
I find it so interesting how it's not that they're identical, but like there were echoes of Christmas traditions that I've grown up with in Norway in those tales.
In a minute. Yes.
Yeah, and Christmas traditions that I'm not sure they're as common nowadays,
Nope.
but also just like from general later folklore, like the Grilla character really reminded me of Huldra, except she has one tail.
Yep.
And yeah, just the concept. Terry, does Icelandic have like a term like nisse, where it's just like, because I haven't found one in English where it's like, because julenissen is Santa Claus, but nisser, they're not elves, they're just nisse. You know what I mean?
I think it's probably better if I just run through the basic points of this and then come back and we go to general.
Yeah, please do.
So it's like a sort of chat lecture thing. But the Nissa, just very quickly on it, very interesting because it doesn't come to Iceland. And it doesn't really come to England very much, but it does come to Orkney in one sense or another.
Right.
And the big question is why, when the name Nissa is connected to Nicholas, and exactly what's going on with this. And it's partly because the figure who protected you against the wild ride in the Norwegian version is the Nissa, or the Rudningskarl, or the Guardvord, the person who protects the farm. And he's a little bit like sort of Mighty Mouse. You don't annoy him. You don't eat his porridge. Start off with. If you do, he'll play volleyball with you over the top of the house.
Then he'll get quite. He can get quite annoyed.
I have to say the least, absolutely, because he's also got his own bed in the farmhouse, and you don't sleep in that either. So he gets pretty mean. So he's going to. We'll come back to him. Shall I just go on sharing these pictures and run through, and then we'll come back to the general questions afterwards. Should we do that? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I have a bunch.
Okay. Here's the wild ride, and often associated, of course, with Odin as the leader. Now, what's interesting is that we've got two sets of stories. We've got the Norwegian ones, which Max was talking about beforehand. And then we also have the Swedish ones and many areas of Denmark. Now, these areas tend to talk about, and you can see the little marks for how common these stories are in the south of Sweden. These deal with a hunter and a supernatural woman, and then somebody in the countryside, and he's out there, and suddenly he hears noise coming, and then a woman comes running along the path, sort of topless, and apparently with her breasts thrown over her shoulders, which is a little bit odd. And then she said, "Don't tell him where I'm going. Don't tell him where I'm going." And then she runs off, and then the hunter solo guy comes along and says, "Which way did she go?" And the person says, "That way, to the other way." And then he heads off, but later comes back with this woman over his horse, and then he takes her away. So these are the normal southern wild hunt stories. What's interesting are the names that are used for the hunter. And as you can see down here, I have Odin's Jakt, Noen, Owan, Hoan, Joa, Valdemar, Olle, and various other names as well at the same time. And the same applies if we go off into Denmark. So this is that one here. Denmark, the same sorts of names, Odin connection names. Sometimes Hin, which means the other one, it's another name of naming the devil. And northern Germany and Denmark, you have clearly Wodan. So it's the hunt, but there's only one guy involved, which is worth noting. But clearly a connection with the figure of Odin. Now in German, I've given you an example of the story itself as it was before. Here you can see a few other types of story. Again, the fairy hunter, the one single guy. but very rarely a whole group of people chasing. And again, what time? It's usually sometime during the winter, but not always at Christmas. So that only happens in a number of cases. But the Norwegian versions are quite different. So here's an image that goes along with the image of the hunter going by with his dogs. And here you have a map of sort of how common this story is in Denmark. And again, the same sort of idea, but sort of a main hunt, but a main leader, and then a whole pile of dogs chasing. Now, to give you a story that we have here from Denmark. All over Denmark, the story says basically there can occur a terrible form of hunting in which everyone who has seen and heard of it speaks with horror. And what happens is that at certain seasons, one hears whistling and roaring up in the sky, howling and clamor, cracking and clattering, like when a hunting party is careering through the woods and fields with horns blowing and hounds baying and huntsmen galloping wildly. Now, in this case, it's not just a single figure, but a whole group. And the country people say this is the flying huntsman, and they people should throw themselves onto the ground or hide behind a tree while the monstrous company has gone by. And it's called King Volmar's Hunt. But King Valdemar is now condemned to go hunting every night all the way across Denmark. And he comes through the air with his hunting party. And as he comes closer, you hear howling, clamor, crackling of whips, and straight afterwards comes the hunt with the hounds that run rapidly to and fro, snuffling the ground with long glowing tongues lolling from their jaws. And then Volmar himself on a white horse, and sometimes with his head under his left arm. Now, if he meets anybody, especially any old people, he orders them to hold hounds or he fires a shot. And then he goes hunting, and you can hear him smashing gates down, and he'll even go through a farm. All of the bolts on the farm doors open before him when he comes. And it says there are certain farms that he regularly takes his course through, in at one gate, out at the other, and people leave gates open for him. And in one farm, about which the tale is told, we hear about him passing over buildings, and the roof on the farm has near enough collapsed in the middle where he would ride over it so commonly. Now, this is from Denmark, but it's approaching a Norwegian version. So here's the Eddic poem going back to the Middle Ages. And then we come on to the Norwegian stories, which are called the Åsgårdeia, the Juleskrei, or Julereia. And we hear about these very clearly in an early play by Henrik Ibsen, where a Viking lady, see if I've got a picture of her. So, no. There's a Viking lady who dies at the end of the play, and then everybody hears a strange sound in the sky, and the children look up and they can see the wild hunt riding over the top, led by a female figure who was the one who just died in the play. So again, a group led by females. Now, you see, as you have your Åsgårdeia, which some people connect with Odin, but otherwise the Christmas ride, the Juleskrei. And again, here what happens is that they come down from the mountains and they take over farms as they come down. There's sometimes trolls, sometimes the dead, sometimes criminals. And as Mags will know, Norway in the western fjords, these small little farms are dominated by very, very powerful landscape. And certainly you're very small compared to the nature element. And what would happen as Christmas approached, everybody knew these stories about the coming of the Juleskrei, and what they would do is put nails above doors, especially made from silver. They would put sickles and scissors into the cribs of children to stop them being stolen, or in the doorway, or even in the farm stream. And then they would put tar crosses over the tops of doors to keep the wild ride from coming through the farm and stealing everybody and stealing people at the same time. And this was certainly seen as being very, very real for anybody living there. And the sort of stories that were being told, this isn't the number of stories that we have here, Christmas visitors who were telling about the people who would be taking over farms, the Juleskrei or Julerei. And to give you one story from Sogn, There's a story about somebody which had there was a tradition of visiting a bathhouse just before a day before Christmas, and it was very important to get out of the bath before the wild ride came down. And when you were the last one in the bath, that was an unenviable position because everybody had heard of how one man who was still cleaning up the bathhouse before leaving never got back to the farm later on. When the people on the farmhouse timidly went out in search of him that evening, they heard foul voices coming from the darkness in the vicinity of the bathhouse, in which the man had never returned from. "We're nibbling away at old pear, we are," they say, nibbling and nibbling. And when they got there next morning, very much like in the saga story I told you about earlier on, there wasn't much left of him. It was sort of bitten to pieces out there. So these store farmhouses, this is what they were basically terrified of over Christmas. And I say the Wild Ride had various versions. This picture we've seen before, but what's interesting is that it wasn't just stories of them taking over farms at Christmas time. And the common story, if we go back to that a little bit and come on to these costumes afterwards, is that let's take these farmhouses. Everybody knew that the wild ride was going to take over the farm, and so they all moved out of the main farm to let them take over. And then along at Christmas time came a knock on the door, and in came a man with no name. And I can think of, on one side, Clint Eastwood, or you can think of Bruce Willis is much better. And he came onto the farm, and they said, we're going to be attacked this evening by the wild ride. And we're going to leave, so it's going to be dangerous for you. "Ah, no problem for me," he says. And he's also accompanied by a polar bear, of all things. And he settles himself inside the house with the polar bear. And
it's a good companion to have, I feel.
I know, they burst in and take over the place and start eating all of the food. And then suddenly he comes out and says, "Cheers" to everybody. And they, what the hell's that? And then out comes the polar bear at the same time. And they say, "Jesus, never seen a cat that big before." And they all go running away and leave the house. And then he is free to look after the food, but they never come back again. And basically, we do have the Die Hard story here and the Beowulf story still going on about the man with no name coming. Now, interestingly, that story also goes on to Iceland. And we're going to be connecting Iceland and Grýla with all of this again in just a minute. In Iceland, they knew that the idea of a group of trolls taking over a farm was stupid, because in Iceland, trolls are that big you couldn't get one into a farmhouse, let alone a whole group of them. So they changed the story and made it a group of elves who actually had their own place to have their own party without needing to take over farms. And then the idea of a polar bear is actually very stupid, according to Icelandic ideas. You're going to be eaten. And so the Icelandic version has a man with a sheep appearing at the farm, which again is particularly odd of why anybody's going to be scared of a sheep. But nonetheless, it's the same story adapting itself to the countryside. Now, alongside these stories, we have traditions. And these are closely connected to the idea of the wild ride, in that people would dress up in costumes and come around farms at Christmas time. And this is Lucia around the Hardanger area of Norway, who looks exactly like Grýla is described, with horns, with a tail, and with a bag to collect dead children. And is definitely a female. And just as the wild ride is led by a female called Gurra, which is very close to Grýla. And then beside her, we have a Julisvein, who's also got horns and a sort of goat costume. Same word as we have in Iceland with the Christmas lads. So these groups of people coming around in Norway were sometimes called Julisveinar, just like the ones who visit farms in Iceland, visit children today in Iceland. And again, they took as they visited. Now, a quick advert here for a book that's available free online and has lots of pictures of all of these traditions, which is Mask and Mumming in the Nordic area. And these are a bunch of Norwegian mummers going around at Christmas time. Note the goat costume. And very similar.
Julebukk.
Yep, julebukk, absolutely, julegeit. And these traditions go way south into Austria, where you've got horned figures called the Krampus, We have Pechten, also in Germany and Austria, incredibly frightening masks. And they'll often be going around
Yeah.
with Nicholas to visit, but they're not the devil. They're all connected to this horned figure that we see running up to Grilla. And I've been to Sardinia, where these figures go around, and they're quite incredible. Nowadays, they go around at
Wow.
Shrovetide, but they used to go around at Christmas. There's a whole bunch of them carrying up to about 30 kilos of bells. They make no sounds, but they jump as they go around the town, growling at people. So again, Christmas.
30 kilos of bells?
Yep, absolutely.
That is a ridiculous amount of bells.
It is. It is. And note she's wearing a headscarf. Again, it's a woman. Now we come to the Julebook, which what Mags was going on to before. These horned figures on staffs that would go around, the mouth would open and shut. It sometimes has ash coming out of it and steam. And think of the farmhouse being dark, full of smoke, full of darkness, shadows, and these smelly things coming and bursting their way into the living room. Along at the same time as you'd heard stories about the wild ride crashing its way into the living room. Children, of course, are terrified as these things come in. And yeah, there's a figure here with sticks in front, which you still find, men and women, male and female. Norway, known all over Norway, not just in Bergen or Oslo or Trondheim or any of these places. So this is the Julebook where they're found. This is the Julegeit, the Christmas goat. Again, found way down deep into the fjords, where these stories of the wild ride also lived. As you can see, they got pretty violent. This is a picture from Denmark, but they would be knocking over people. People would try and find out who they were, grabbing them, trying to guess whether they were male or female, and everybody making fun of each other. And again, terror of children as these figures come into the darkness. We find similar sorts of things in Shetland, where they're wearing straw costumes, and similar sorts of fears. But when we come to Shetland, interestingly, the name again is Grulak. So we have something going on here with Gurorisa River, Grulak, the Grulaks, Grilla. There is some shared idea of the sort of wild ride.
I have to say, the straw one doesn't look as terrifying,
right?
As
Except
the previous.
No, but except the straw hat goes over the head. And there would be a room full of about 9 of them who would be dancing in a room very close to a fire and in danger of setting themselves on fire. And they would grunt.
I think you stand corrected, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would grunt, and children certainly I've spoken to who have met them in the darkness were terrified of these beings. So we're coming to an end of this.
Scaring children, isn't it?
But essentially, wintertime being associated with women. Which does make a certain amount of sense in that people are moving into the female space at wintertime, into the farm. Festival to women at the beginning of winter in Sweden, at the end of the winter, and in the middle we have these frightening figures that take over and eat children for fun.
So when does Christmas become this joyful thing? Because obviously as a Brit, we've lost a lot of this, and it's very much the enjoyment for children. The idea of scaring kids is so far away from like the British Christmas. So when does that happen?
It's connected closely with Christianity as trying to make things a little bit easier when that comes along. The idea that's stressing the idea of birth rather than death. Although in a sense, of course, the winter season is connected to both death and birth. Anybody living in nature is well aware that life comes out of death, that things grow out of death. And women, of course, are in charge of looking after the dead and looking after births at the same time. Mm-hmm. Women are connected in a sense.
I don't know if this actually.
Yep.
I don't know if this actually tracks, but a lot of the way that I kind of, I guess, my impression of like the Scandinavian and Norwegian specific folklore that I've grown up with, especially like things that can be traced back as to, as late as, the 19th century, like it's never felt kind of it's never kind of really felt at odds with the Christian practice in a way, because it's almost felt like a way of making sure that kids don't disappear into the night during winter, being like, hey, stay where there is light, because you will not find your way back. Like, I don't know if that's actually the connection, but that's always how I've felt about it. Like, when I've been outside in like the Scandinavian winter, and the further north you go, if you're not by a source of light, and if there's not a lot of snow and there's not a lot of starlight or moonlight, it is like there is a type of darkness, especially if you're in a wooded area. I can't even describe the type of darkness that you're dealing with because it's so encompassing. So I don't know, Terry, like, do you have any input to that?
That picture I showed of Stalheim, which I love, the dial picture of the mountains and the little farms. Yes, if we think of this place in darkness, then there's a lot of nature around when you're in the Norwegian fjords or up in the mountains there. But the key element several things to think about here. First of all, that Christmas is a period you desperately hope that you've got enough food in for. You never know, is the food actually going to survive is the family going to survive or not? And there are going to be there may well be other people who need to stay with you, especially in Iceland. If a ship sinks, you may have a whole crew with you, and you may not have enough food to feed them all. Secondly, across Norway, we don't get it the same really in Iceland. But if you go up to the mountain there, in the summertime, the world is opened on the farm right up into the mountain dairies, up to the Sæter or the Sel in Icelandic. That's where everybody goes. They take the cows and the sheep up to the top of the mountains, and that's where they're making cheese and butter and cream and things of that kind. But you have the rule is as according to legends, which warn you about safety, you must leave the Sæter by beginning of October, late September, because if you don't, then women up there are often abducted by the supernatural because they are now moving in. And that idea of them moving in on the farm goes on right up until Christmas. As the snow line comes down, anybody in the mountains in Norway will be aware of this, Iceland too, it gets darker and as Christmas approaches. And some areas of Norway, you would not even go outside on Christmas Day because outside is just, it is the supernatural landlords have taken it over again. And if we think about the sounds out there in the darkness of animals rubbing against the side of the house, are you going to dare go out and see what's going on? Is it an animal? Or you've got an avalanche, landslide, glaciers growling, wind, all sorts of things out there. So you can see it's a period of, there is fear, and there are all sorts of really creepy Norwegian traditions about Christmas, which way is the candle going to burn on the table? If it goes towards one person, they're going to be dead next year. If you look under their chair and you find a cross made of straw under someone's chair, oops, they're going to be dead next year. And of course, it happens at our own tables. It happens at our own tables. If it's always the same family, you're thinking back last Christmas, Granddad was here, he's not here anymore now. And then who's going to be here next year? And the old people, oops, is it going to be me or not? There is it's a liminal time of what's going to happen at this sacred gathering, where we say the same things, we pull the same crackers, we pull all of the things that we've always done in the same way before.
Yeah.
We're stepping into a sacred space of almost sacrifices. Yeah.
I think that's something in the modern day we've probably lost because you're filled by entertainment.
Yeah.
If you live in a built up area, there's always a TV on, a radio on, your phone, you're maybe reading, but usually there'd be some sound there. We've all
and just the amount of light we've come into, like we've touched on light pollution a lot the past couple of episodes, Dan, but like the amount of light available to us currently is astounding compared to just like 100 years ago.
Right.
But
sorry, Dan, I cut you off.
No, it's fine. But we've all heard that noise in the night when things are meant to be quiet, and we just hear that creak or that bang. Something usually explainable, but it freaks us out today. We're like, and that disconnect with the spirituality and superstition is kind of gone. All I think is lost on a lot of. I think a lot of people still believe in. I feel like people maybe believe in spirits because they're unsure whether to or not. They'll hedge the bets. Whereas I think throughout history, it wasn't a belief; it just was.
No, and I think
spirits
also,
just existed.
If we think our Santa Claus traditions, what do we feel about other times of the year? Somebody coming down the chimney and going to our house in the middle of the night. We're not happy about this. And we sort of accept the idea of the house being broken into in the night by some hairy guy.
We leave food for him.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing is the idea of leaving out whiskey or sherry or whatever for Santa Claus, along with some biscuits and some stuff for the reindeer. Actually, what we're doing here is leaving out a Christmas sacrifice. It's the remains of that. Mm-hmm. And Santa Claus is, of course, the Nicholas, when it comes down to it. But he's still breaking into our houses. But it's now seen as being acceptable. Huh?
So
this. Oh, go on. No, go ahead.
No, I'm just. It's so interesting how all of these these amalgamations of things and the regional traits that they take on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that was my only comment, Dan. Please go ahead.
The wild hunt. Mm-hmm. I've always heard of it as having that male figure leading, and then a procession of ghostly or sometimes like female figures. But it seems with what you presented, it's mainly more female led. Is that just an Icelandic, Northern Europe, or is that just sometimes
this is
again
Western Norway,
regional?
Western Norway, and Western Norway, and running across the Northern Isles into Iceland. Which it does suggest, and maybe even Ireland as well. The slaves from Ireland will have come along with ideas of a female figure being associated with the winter. So it's just, this is my argument essentially that for some people there was this division of the year. Winter, summertime being a time of market, war, parliamentary meetings outside the farm, cutting down crops. Wintertime is when everything goes on out of sight, in a sense, within the womb of the earth. This is that women had the keys of the house. They were in charge of the slaves. Everyone's moved into their space. And they're also the ones who know how to deal with the supernatural, because they're much more closely connected with knowledge of past and present and things of this kind. And physically, when it comes down to it, of course, gender statements are always risky, but at the same time, women came directly out of their mothers, and out of them will come the next generation. Guys, we're more on the side of things when it comes down to it. There's an element of a Russian doll about women. There are the eggs, which will go on to, in a sense, forever within the egg and the egg and the egg.
That's
and
how
the egg.
I've always felt. I've always felt like a Russian doll. Thank you for putting a word on it.
Exactly. Dan, you'll never see Max again in the same way. She's got all time within her. Yeah.
I mean, if you just look through the photos of how my hair has changed during the last decade, there is a Russian doll element to it.
There we go. But it is certainly, so these women ride horses. They have swords. They are like the world of death, which is ruled in Old Norse belief by Hel or Skadi or by Raun. And it's a world where women rule and where women are on horseback with weapons and men are under their command. So in a sense, death has taken over for the wintertime with the darkness. But death doesn't
Which
mean...
makes sense, because everything is dying, like the plants and everything.
It's dying, but it's growing. At the same time, out of death comes life. And for us, the two are separated. For anybody living in the countryside, they're well aware of this. Out of dead leaves comes new leaves. When it comes down to it. Yeah.
I think the natural question is, and if this wild hunt figure or procession is mainly female and it's linked with death. Is there any connection to Valkyries and this
Absolutely.
collecting of souls for Ragnarok type situation? Is it a way to collect these figures?
Right. Well, the name Valkyrie means the chooser of the dead, basically. They choose. And later on, as Odin starts taking over, he becomes the chooser. But initially, they're the ones who choose. And they are, of course, associated with the world of death, which is hell, again. So they are spirits that ride and collect, maybe connected with, on one side, with the women who wander, take over a graveyard after, take over a battlefield afterwards, either curing or killing, um, and the ravens that move in, the winged figures that take over. So closely, they're all closely associated with each other. The ride of figures associated with the dead. The Decid are often regarded as being sort of foremothers who look after the family rather than individuals. The Valkyrie look after individual warriors. But this, of course, is part of, I don't know, a whole bunch of warriors living alone. It's a young men, sort of 17, 18, living alone in a hall. It's quite natural they should be dreaming of female figures looking after them. It comes down to it. It happens also with charcoal burners. In Sweden, they seem to be doing this all the time, dreaming of trees that turn into women. I suppose it's the male warrior, sort of Neanderthal side.
So, do we know at what point? Because you said this comes from Western Norway.
Yeah.
Are we able to see where it changes from a male figure or? Because again, you always hear it being Odin. When is that, and when does that kind of disappear?
Yeah, I can't remember. We may have talked about this slightly before. What's happening from about 500 onwards? This is as people are moving back from Rome, the tribes in northern Scandinavia coming back. It seems to be a period of bad weather, volcanic eruptions, collapse of at around about 536, collapse of harvests. There's no sun for about 3 years. The period of chaos.
It's like a mini ice age.
Yeah, exactly. It's a period of chaos in Scandinavia, a period of conflict between returning warrior groups and those who've been living at home, and people needing land and needing food. And it's the beginning of the movement from small tribes into confederations of tribes into nations. And the what's going on around that is that as a powerful national ruler, you need more than just a tribe behind you. You need a lot of warriors. And the natural way of doing things in Scandinavia would have been that you went with your clan, with your family people from your valley. Now you need, as a ruler, to get people from elsewhere, and you create a sort of a pseudo family. The warriors, younger warriors from families join you, and they get taken into your family where you're a sort of father figure. And at the same time, they've all come in with lots of different religious beliefs. You want to create an over religion with a father figure. And the All Father, who is over everybody, who these new kings said they were related to, is Odin. And this is so as Scandinavia is becoming a more warlike society, and this is especially Denmark and southern Sweden, that's where we see, in a sense, men seemingly taking over. Before that, women's teams seem to have been looking, this is a very big generalization, women looking after religion and prophecy and things of this kind on the farm, and men dealing with the other side. But now Odin, in a sense, is taking over the world of the dead. He's also, this is what you say to your warriors. So if you come with me, die for me, I'm going to give you a place in heaven where women will serve you. Same sort of idea of terrorists blowing themselves up in the imaginary idea they're going to meet 2,000 virgins on the next world. This sort of idea of being offered a sort of male heaven afterwards. They've learned this from the Christian states around them, and they're taking on a number of things that they've seen in France and Germany and elsewhere, but without taking Christianity on. So what seems to be happening, especially in those areas, is the arrival of new kingship. Southern Sweden and Denmark. Norway is gradually beginning to do this as well with Harald Hardfari with the hair, who says he's uniting Norway. But as we've heard, basically, Norway's still not really united yet. Bergen's never come under the rest of the country as it comes down to it. But yes, there is a male takeover. And I think it's partly related to that. We find the woman who does the prophecy, she's the last seeress of this kind. And we're heading towards a Christian religion, which is essentially male, except for the fact that it's sold to women because it involves birth and children, which the Old Norse religion didn't do. It offers a place for God to come out of a woman. That's quite attractive until later on they discover it's all about men. But initially, yes, it's women can set up a nunnery and things of this kind, keep independence. But there is this.
And during those centuries, Christianity goes through a lot of upheavals as well, and things are restructured. And
right, you've got to get the books there. They have no idea what they're accepting until the books are there and people have been educated. It takes years for this to take place. But yeah, so this is I think partly what's going on. Southern Sweden and Denmark and Germany are very closely connected. I think there's a lot of older things floating around Western Norway. And this is fjords. It's very, very difficult communication between people. And the Icelanders who have the sagas, these two are essentially Western Norwegian. We know very little about Eastern Scandinavia because this stuff is written in Iceland and essentially. So I covered a lot there, but yeah.
No, that was one thing I wanted to ask about, because when I was doing some basic research, it seems that the idea of the wild hunt was documented by is it Jakob Grimm?
Yep.
But I assume that just means that he popularized it and kind of when it says documented, was it written down, like it was written in other sources?
Yeah, his Deutsche Sagen, which too little attention's been paid to while everyone's looking at Kinder and Hausmärchen, the children's stories, is a mixture of ancient written stories, like William Tell, things of this kind, and then a number of stories they picked up from people, oral stories. It's got two halves really to it. He certainly sees this as being the remnants of ancient ideas, of ancient religion. This is where you can find ancient beliefs within the legends. He's got a lot of respect for Norway because so many stories have been preserved in Iceland. So he's in a sense trying to create a Teutonic, shared Germanic space, and for that he can pull in the Norwegian things. And but he's nonetheless calling them Deutsche.
Germans keep doing that.
Yeah, I know. And he had certain plans for Germany to swallow up Denmark, much of Denmark as well. But so he certainly borrows ideas from certainly Denmark and Sweden for his wild hunt ideas. And this is where Wagner gets his idea of the Valkyries from. Because we do have this poem which talks about this hero telling his wife, who's decided to visit him in his grave for the night. And he says, sort of, "Stop crying, dear. I need to go and join my mates and go riding off with them in the sky." So there is this sort of idea of heroes riding in the sky, but that's not really all we have. The much wider version is these women figures. Yeah.
Because that's something that I was curious about, the whole riding in the sky thing. Because when I've come across, and again, I don't know where the authors of these books that I've read necessarily were inspired by what stories they pulled from, but when I've encountered themes that touch on what is referred to as a wild hunt in these fantasy, like modern fantasy books, they're always like attached to the sky. It's always this like ambiguous, dangerous something, and often connected with like elves in this like Lord of the Rings elves type scenario thing.
Yeah, Tolkien's got the
But
idea
it's like,
of the
yeah.
Dark Riders, absolutely. And then I think there's a lot of ideas, and Tolkien certainly borrows. When they come down, I think, like on a waterfall or something,
Hmm.
and Gandalf stands in the way. Yes,
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Because I was just wondering, like, if considering that the wild hunt as, a legend
Mhm.
exists in so many different
Yeah.
places. I mean, you just said that, the whole sky thing maybe isn't as common, but it seems to be common enough for people to pick up on it. And it's an interesting element. Like, is
Yeah,
that
it
like
is.
a cross cultural thing of the wild hunt that it they ride through the sky?
It's a sound that you hear in the air. It's strongly connected to. Sometimes some people connect the dog sound to geese going over the top
Mm-hmm.
and moving south. It's sounds that you hear in the sky, not underneath your feet, certainly,
Right.
in the distance. Within the darkness outside, the Aesir gods were certainly seen as being sky gods too. We have the word Aus, which also means top of a house, but also a ridge on a mountain. The Aesir, the higher
Also,
ones,
yeah. Mm.
the high ones, as opposed to Freyr, for example, the Vanir, who were more connected to the earth. And again, in Norway, where does the sun go? It goes to the tops of the mountains. It comes up from the mountains, which is again very different to say southern Sweden, Tarnum, where it goes down in the sea. But for Norwegians,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go and it disappears into the mountains. And this lot
Mm-hmm.
come down from the mountains. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's yeah, it's the air, it's the sky that comes. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
quite natural when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And
Um, let's wrap up the main show, and then
Okay.
cause I want to let people ask some questions. I'm cautious of keeping you too long.
No,
I don't want to eat into your festive pre-festive Sunday. I don't know what to call it, but it feels like
okay,
it's
so
it should be a
I've got about
relaxing day
another 10
today.
minutes. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay. So yeah, we'll wrap this up. Do you have any ongoing projects or books that you would like to point anybody
Um,
towards?
we have a new book out, which in the future will be free. Certainly, there's Masks and Mumming in the Nordic countries, which you can find as a PDF free online from the Gustav Adolfs Academy in Sweden. So Masks and Mumming in the Nordic area. And that's got all of these traditions. Look at Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and a number of other aspects. And a lot of beautiful pictures, like some of these ones I've been showing here, of these traditions, and how similar they all are, and that we need to go beyond borders, national borders, if we come down to it. Then there's another book just come out now, which from the same place, which should be free in the future, which is about the god Freyr, and everything we know about Freyr in Sweden, which runs from archaeology and it goes into literature materials, place names, folklore, and then arguments about what sort of gods the Vanir and Freyr were. And then the third one that's sort of out there, but it's probably too much. You're going to have to be singing on street corners to pay for it. Is a book that we call Grim Ripples, and I just love that name because it describes an intense wild ride too. The Grim Ripples with
that's a very cool title.
two M's. And this looks at how the Deutsche Sagen that you mentioned with Jakob Grimm, what happened was that they included Danish stories and Swiss stories as part of this, and Austrian ones as part of the German ones. The Danes did not like this. and they immediately published Danish legends. The Swedes didn't like the Danes boasting too much, and they started collecting Swedish legends. The Norwegians weren't happy about being included on the Danish ones, so they did the Norwegian legends. And all of these countries were searching for national images, Scottish, the Irish, and everybody. And that book then looks at how folk tales were collected across Northern Europe as there was an attempt to create a national image, and then art connected to it and everything. The Grim Ripples, that's out there. So maybe Christmas. You're going to need 2 Christmas presents for this. It's a little bit too expensive, but it'll be in a library near you coming soon.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful.
Well, I mean, it gives us some choices for non-Christmas episodes.
Yeah,
we can do where we can do one maybe in the middle of the year, and it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
Mags, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at ArcheoMags, Archeo with a K.
Perfect. And for me, it's Daniel_Farrand1 on Instagram, Horns Voting for the business, and then Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. And I guess happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays.
For you.